so much fun to be here again. I love when I come to a place that I've visited before and visited the group before, and I see faces I recognize. It's a nice young man here. Remind me of your first name, hon. Ian, who I remember from my last visit, except that he was somewhere down here. So, thanks. So, for those of you who may not have been here last time, yes, I have been scaring up history in the city of Burlington since 2002 under the umbrella of my tours, Queen City Ghostwalk. And I came by having a haunted tour in kind of a funny way. I am from a family of mostly women, I think, but some of the men as well in our family's history who are a little bit ghosty, as I would say. They tend to see things that other people don't. And I always thought, that wasn't me. But when you grow up in a family that is unusual, anybody ever remember there was after John Goodman did the show Roseanne, he had another show on TV for a brief period of time, and his family was just loony. And he said to someone on one of those episodes of the show, when you meet my family, you get the feeling that somewhere out there there's a carnival running itself. And when I was a teenager, that's how I felt about my family. They were all a little wacky and wild. So the last thing you want when you're a teenager who's already feeling a little bit on the edge about how everything's presented is to say, yeah, my family also sees ghosts. So that wasn't something that I kept on the front burner until I went on a tour to Salem, Massachusetts with the man who is now my ex-husband. And on that tour, on the vacation we went on this ghost tour, and it was just fantastic to see the history presented with a hook. And I thought, gosh, Burlington should really have a haunted tour. And my then husband said, you couldn't do that in Burlington. And I said, sort of like, just watch me. Well, I got home, and just a few days later, I was, do not ask for whom the bell tolls. A few days later, I was putting together the name Queen City Ghostwalk and filing it with the Secretary of State's office as a DBA, doing business as. And the rest is kind of history, and the fact that I, through everything that I've done, have learned to be a good student of and to love history, something I was not in school. In school, I unfortunately had history teachers who just wanted us to please remember the name, remember the date, and there was no subtext for it, none of the juicy gossip from the 1700s and 1800s, and that's the stuff I like. So I've written over the years haunted books for the History Press in Arcadia, things like Haunted Burlington, Spirits of Vermont's Queen City, Ghosts and Legends of Lake Champlain, Haunted Inns and Ghostly Getaways of Vermont. Actually got in trouble with one of the folks who lives here in town right before that book came out. A place whose name shall remain unspoken, but a place that has been known as a haunted place, but apparently is no longer. And then Wicked Vermont. And Wicked Vermont is a book of the non-haunted variety, but I would say I probably had more fun writing Wicked Vermont than any of the haunted books I've written. One of the reasons is I discovered, doing research for the book Wicked Vermont, which is history of all the people in Vermont, or not all, but many people in the state of Vermont from the 1700s through the early 1900s, for whom things were done a little bit they did things a little on the down low. They were under the radar. It's sort of the quirky side of Ethan Allen, and the idea that for us, Ethan Allen is this larger-than-life figure, a Revolutionary War hero, a guy who has a statue on a big pedestal in Washington, D.C. We look at this guy and we say, yes, Ethan Allen, and we are in many ways rogue like he was and strong like he was, but the fact of the matter is that there were a lot of people who just thought Ethan Allen was a big pain in the butt. I mean, he was a hard drinker, he was a loud talker, he was larger than life. People said that, especially younger brothers who loved putting forth that wonderful legend, they were his best PR. People had said that he could wrestle a bear with his bare hands. He was as strong as an ox. But this was a guy who also told lots of stories about himself. And those stories back in the day were picked up by folks like playwrights and made even larger than this larger life character could even dream. One of the great things I learned about doing research for this book was I was working on the chapter about prohibition here in Vermont. And prohibition in Vermont is a very interesting thing. I never realized that we didn't just have prohibition here in Vermont during the time of prohibition in the 1920s, what I call prohibition with a capital P. In Vermont, we had prohibition dating back to the 1830s. But there's a museum in Bennington that has a little placard, apparently, in their display about prohibition, and they talk about how Montpelier gave the counties local options so that in many parts of the state, we weren't really dry during that time, we were simply damp. What I discovered writing that chapter was that my very own sainted grandmother actually had a brush with liquor laws when she was a young mother of 5. She was a single mother living in Burlington. And how many people here, I'm sure, many people here remember the blue laws. The blue laws, yes. I remember being a kid and living out of the state for a few years and coming back from California as a teenager, and we needed something, detergent or something. It was Sunday, and I said to my mom, I'll just go over to the corner store and get it. And she said, no, you won't. Why not, Mom? Well, because of the blue laws. You can't buy stuff on Sundays. And I thought, well, kick in the head. So back in the 1940s, when my mother was 5 years old, my grandmother was a newly single mom trying to make ends meet. And apparently one of the ways she was doing that was she was selling shots of liquor out of her kitchen, out the back door of her apartment. Now imagine me, my grandmother, the woman who taught me to sew, the woman who was always there when I needed her, the woman who everyone pretty much thought would do no wrong, was selling shots of liquor to strangers in the 1940s. Looking at the Street Press article, and I see her name, and I call my mother on the phone, and I said, Mom, what is the deal with this? Why didn't you tell me this? And she said, oh, I thought you knew. Everybody knows about that. I said, not me. Well, apparently what happened was, it was a Sunday, and my grandmother was there at home. It was before the holidays, and this gentleman came to the door, came to the front door of the apartment, and he told my grandmother he understood that she was in the habit of selling a shot or two to those in need. And she said, sure. And she said to him, what you need to do is come around the building and go to the back door. Well, apparently her younger sister, a teenager at the time, said to her once the door was closed, are you out of your mind? You're going to sell liquor to this guy? We don't even know him. And my grandmother said, are you kidding me? Did you get a look at him? The guy is gorgeous. So the guy went around to the back door. This man, neatly dressed, handsome. She let him in, brings the bottle of liquor to the kitchen table, gets out a little shot glass, and pours the shot. And as soon as she did, 3 liquor inspectors burst into the apartment, front door, back door. My mother remembers that she and her sister had just a week before been what they called down street in Burlington, on Church Street. They'd been shopping for Christmas, and they were just so put out that these liquor inspectors were in their room, going through all of their bags and throwing presents everywhere. Now, you might think, that sounds terrible and traumatic, call child services immediately. But in my family, the family that you think of Carnival is out there somewhere around the south, it's all perfectly normal, apparently. So I learned so many things writing this book. I learned that we had a young man in the city of Burlington who ran away and joined the circus in the early 1800s and became one of, if not the most famous circus bareback rider of his day back in the 1800s. He was known as the Devil Rider. This young boy named Ethan Stone. Ethan Stone was just a young boy of 10 when the circus came to town in Burlington. And boy, if you think that my grandmother selling hooch out her back door was scandalous, back in the 1800s, the circus was a big, mysterious, scandalous thing when it came to town. Well, Ethan Stone saw the circus come into town, and he was thrilled beyond belief, and he was curious as only a young boy can be. And he started wandering over to where the circus had camped out overnight and began to set up their animals and things. And he was befriended by the circus's ventriloquist. Well, one thing led to another, and Eaton Stone, when the circus left town, wanted to leave with it, and the ventriloquist told him, you're good with the horses, and you've got a lot of agility, you could probably make a good living as a bareback rider, and so Eaton Stone went. The problem was, Eaton Stone's father, David, was a prominent attorney in the city of Burlington, and he was not about to have his child run off with the circus and not do anything about it. His wife was bereft, he had other children to consider, and so he filed a suit against this ventriloquist. It was alienation of affection and kidnapping. And so Eaton Stone came home. But months later, he ran away again, and this time his father did not pursue him. Now, to add insult to injury, several years later, when Eaton's younger brother, Charles, got to be of an age when he was also curious and began wandering down when the circus came to town, he ran away with the circus too. He eventually ended up owning his own circus. I understand that when he came back to Burlington with his circus, people were very hospitable, and he was able to get away with lots of things with his circus that other circuses could not. Eaton Stone was such an amazing bareback rider, and he also had tall tales that he would tell. We don't know whether it was really true that when he went out west to perform, he was taken in by Native Americans and costumes were sewn by the Native American women. It's entirely possible that he got this idea on his own and began to sport buckskin and these extravagant sort of turban hats. But one thing was sure, he was so good that he was the toast of the United States and Europe. And when, later on, he settled down in New Jersey and was called upon to help raise money for the Red Cross, he was in his 70s. He hadn't ridden professionally in a little while, but he and Annie Oakley were approached to put on this circus with the rest of the townsfolk. So the people in town were trained, the dog acts, the other animal acts, the acrobats, and Eaton Stone, well, he said yes, he would ride bareback. Now, Annie Oakley, everyone thought that she would be the star of the show. She was going to shoot glass balls out of the air. She hadn't been shooting professionally in public for a long time, but she was going to show her marksmanship by shooting these glass balls out of the air in front of the crowd that had assembled. This huge crowd that assembled in Eaton Stone's practice barn, big barn there in Nutley, New Jersey. Well, people loved Annie Oakley's act, but the star of the show was Eaton Stone, who in his 70s rode bareback on a horse in his old costume, backward, and did a backflip as the horse was galloping around the ring. So, maybe that's a glimpse into why I love Eaton Stone, and I love Vermont history. But I want to read something to you from Wicked Vermont, history a little bit closer to your home, and it has to do with all of those incredible things that happened here in Vermont on the down low during the times of Prohibition, and it's in a chapter in my book called How Dry We Were. Now, one of the funny things about Vermont and Prohibition, one of the things that makes me really grin is, these days you look around the state of Vermont, we've got so many microbreweries, we're practically the beer capital of the world. God forbid, someone should try to take away our beer, right? We've got beer companies here in the state whose beers are so sought after that a young female lawyer from Burlington was actually charged because she was trying to sell a beer called Hetty Topper on Craigslist, which is not something a lawyer should be doing. Apparently she didn't know, wasn't aware. And also we've got beers that are mentioned in Food and Wine magazine and even in Vogue magazine. It's beer has become the new wine, I guess. So I want to read to you a little bit about a woman who was dealing in the sale of alcohol when people were trying to regulate alcohol right here in your own hometown of St. Albans. That's a woman named Catherine Dillon Driscoll. A St. Albans woman named Catherine Dillon Driscoll was famous for evading Vermont's temperance laws. An immigrant from Ireland, she was a wily broad with a big personality. Driscoll was in the business of renting out rooms, and her places, with their reputation for free-flowing liquor, were popular among 1840s railroad workers and other men who frequented them. She was arrested over and over, but served little time for her scofflaw ways. It was suggested she had an in with authorities. Maybe they took the same shine to her she apparently took to some of the railroad men. Men with whom she was very familiar. Driscoll didn't always operate free as a bird. In 1855, she was convicted of 25 temperance violations. In a bold move, she sued the sheriff who arrested her, claiming assault, but eventually dropped the charge. Her marital life was rocky, to say the least. In 1857, she accused her husband, Patrick Dillon, of spousal abuse. His lawyer argued, essentially, that his client's wife was fully capable of beating the bejesus out of him, and that Patrick had been under her thumb, a theory that didn't wash with the judge. Finally, single and fancy-free, Catherine was able to amp up her smuggling, boozing ways. In 1860, she was fined again and jailed, but broke out, continuing to fill her coffers with the proceeds from her liquor sales. In 1862, police raided her place and seized a huge haul, 10 barrels and a keg, with a street value of $1,000, a pretty penny, back in the 1840s and the 1860s. Things went from bad to worse when a drunken worker named Peter McKinney died in Driscoll's saloon. She was cleared of wrongdoing when the charges were mysteriously dropped. After that, she fell on more hard times when the Messier brothers, Edward and Joseph, assaulted her in an attempted robbery. It's hard to know who got the better of whom in the altercation. Driscoll said when she saw they came to rob her, she drew a pistol. One of the boys managed to grab her gun, but refusing to be thwarted, she threw a pan of boiling water on the two, and they left without the money. Driscoll's obituary in the Burlington Free Press, published January 11, 1872, seems a pretty soft-pedaled account of her life and time, considering. I have to hand it to the editor for his decorum. Catherine Driscoll Dillon, it's written, was a very remarkable woman, and no one had obtained a greater notoriety. She came from Ireland, a poor and young woman, with her husband, about the time of the building of the Vermont, Central, and Vermont and Canada railroads in the 1840s. She kept a boarding house for the laborers along the line of the road, and would relocate her business each season as the railroad construction crews progressed up the Winooski River Valley west to Rouse's Point on the shore of Lake Champlain. At her boarding house, whiskey was always available to her boarders and others, in spite of the efforts of the contractors. After the railroads were completed, she moved from Rouse's Point to St. Albans and continued in the same occupation. So, okay. About the time the Maine Law was first enacted. Now, the Maine Law came to us, for those of you who don't know, from the governor of Maine. The governor of Maine was a big temperance guy. And so finally, Vermont bought into it. So we had this thing called the Maine Law. And all of a sudden we were drier than we'd ever been. About the time the Maine Law was first enacted, and for years afterwards, she continued to make life lively for police forces. Catherine herself, as well as others whom she would hire, brought the contraband to the States. Though difficult to capture, she was arrested scores of times and as often escaped either from the county jail or from the courts of justice. Some suspect that Catherine had well-developed relationships with those responsible for enforcing the laws and benefited from their assistance. In 1867, she was indicted by the United States District Court for being connected with smuggling and trafficking of smuggled liquors. She was convicted and obliged to submit to a fine of $2,000, which she paid. So back in those days, it was sort of an anything-goes time where if you could find a way to get along with the powers that were, it would go pretty well for you. But what a lot of confusion around the laws for prohibition. That was the thing I came away with. And also the laws around prostitution back in the 1800s and early 1900s. I mean, in the city of Burlington, prostitution was just rampant until this one particular sheriff or constable in town saw what was going on down at the waterfront, which they called in those days the Bowery, and said something had to be done. And finally, you were seeing a crackdown on these madams who were basically I discovered, the white slaver trade. These young women would come into Burlington's port by ship, and these gentlemen would bring them to the houses of ill repute and basically, from what I've read in the old Burlington Free Press articles about the subject, it was like that old song, 16 Tons, the old railroad song, I owe my soul to the company store. These young women would be cared for. They'd be cared for in a manner of speaking, but everything they got from the women who ran those houses was charged back to them in one way or another. Kimonos, medications, toiletries, you name it. So it was quite a racket in Burlington back in the old days. I want to skip away from this topic and take you to a topic of grisly murder excuse me while I find my place here. So grisly murder in Barrie around the turn of the 20th century, a little bit after. One of the most fascinating things I found in my search through, and I fell regularly down the rabbit hole of history with these old newspaper articles, but I was particularly captured by these love triangles. There are some in the book, and also this particular murder that was a mystery in the town of Barrie. And I'd like to read to you from that chapter called True Detective Stories. Philosopher Henry David Thoreau said, "An early morning walk is a blessing for the whole day." Such was not the case for 18-year-old Harold Jackson, a visitor to Barrie, Vermont, who on the morning of May 4th, 1919, left his hotel at about 7:30 a.m. and stumbled upon something gruesome in a flower garden on Main Street, just feet from the town square. The body of Lucina Courser Broadwell, a young wife and mother who also lived in the community. Jackson found her face down, wearing only shoes, stockings, and a pair of kid gloves. Her clothes and underpinnings, some of them torn, had been stuffed under her body and thrown in a heap nearby. Jackson went to the police station to report what he'd found, but there was nobody there. He doubled back, and at the electric company, he came upon Officer A.B. Curtis, who doubted the teen's story, but followed him back to the scene anyway. Shocked, Curtis placed a coat over the deceased, and then went to alert the state's attorney. Investigators arrived and combed the area, and evidentiary photos were taken. It was noted that Lucina's legs were crossed and her gloves were pulled down away from her wrists. Pictures showed the woman's belongings scattered at various distances from her corpse, as though someone was playing a diabolical game of Hansel and Gretel and had dropped them one by one. Her hat was lying 3 feet away. Her gold watch, etched with her initials and still ticking, was 13 feet away. Her empty purse was 5 feet beyond that. There was a man's white handkerchief around her neck, and her hands were tied with a piece of fabric torn from her unmentionables. It was obvious that the poor thing had been strangled. Based on what they found, investigators believed she was bound and gagged sometime before her body was deposited on Main Street. On the evening of her death, Lucina Broadwell had told her husband she was going to a picture show. What really happened the night of the barbaric killing of the 29-year-old mother of 3, on the cusp of that summer of 1919, made for unsavory entertainment that kept the nearly 17,000 residents of Barrie and the rest of the state gossiping throughout the fall. So what a story. What an incredible story. As it turned out, Lucina Courser Broadwell was part of a group of folks in the city of Barrie at the time, men and women, who were going to the home of a woman named Belle Parker. Belle Parker was a woman who, rather than running a regular house of ill repute, was sort of a matchmaker. She would learn of people who were attracted to one another, who had no place for their trysts, and they would come and meet at her place and get together. Lucina Courser Broadwell was, later on in an interview with her husband, was said to be, by her husband, a woman who was kind of sporty. And back in those days, if you were sporty, that meant that you were interested, probably, in having relations outside of marriage or with someone casually, very casually. So 1919 in Barrie, the idea to me that something like this would be going on, it's kind of crazy, almost like a little club, it's just fascinating to me. We all these days, we see on TV and in the movies the sort of atmosphere of anything goes, and it seems like that didn't come upon us all suddenly with the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s. This is something that was on the down low in Vermont and other places for years. So I certainly hope, I know that I was talking with this nice lady over here who saw the little promotional preview about the book. I feel like there are lots of things in the book that are relatable to lots of different people. Smuggling. One of the things about Lake Champlain that I find fascinating is the whole idea that we had these smugglers who, if they weren't going up through the Notch, they were going up Lake Champlain. And I mentioned a man who was a Burlington resident back in the late 1700s and early 1800s named Gideon King. He's a fellow that I talk about quite a bit on my haunted tours because there's a restaurant in Burlington that was a building he owned back in the early 1800s. And it's a restaurant that I believe is the most haunted restaurant in the city of Burlington, or maybe even in the state of Vermont. It's called the American Flatbread Company. Now, I see you nodding and some of you laughing. Before it was the American Flatbread Company, it was a restaurant that for a couple of decades was so popular in the area. It was called Carver's. So the location has housed restaurants for decades, but back when Gideon King owned the place, he said he built it as a place to store his masts and sails for his ships. And I want to tell you, Gideon King had a lot of ships. Gideon King was smart enough after the Revolutionary War to take his men to Boston's harbor and to Whitehall, New York, and grab up these ships that were disabled and tow them back to Burlington's harbor, resurrect them, and then lease them to other captains, would-be lake captains. Some of them would go off to do Gideon King's bidding, would go off to do smuggling for him. Some of them just merely had their own things going on, where they were towing goods from one place to another. They needed a boat to do it with. But at one point in time, Gideon King either owned or owned interest in just about every ship in Burlington's harbor. Smart businessman. Here's a story I tell on my tour as a little precursor to the ghost story. Gideon King's father passed away. This is actually a story in the book. Gideon King's father passed away, and Gideon King was all of a sudden in charge of not just his own property, but his father's property, and figuring out the estate. And there was this one parcel of land that his father had leaseholder rights to, and Gideon King didn't want to let it go, but it was a big pain in the butt. It was School Lot 116, and it was on the edge of Burlington, on the very edge of the south part of Burlington. And every year, Gideon King had to pay $60 for this thing after his father passed away. So finally, he went to the city fathers in Burlington. They're all fathers then on the council, no mothers, no women. And he said, I just don't want to pay for this anymore. I'm just too complicated, too much to think about, another thing to do on my tick off my to-do list. So, and I'm paraphrasing of course, because who knows if they said to-do lists back in the early 1800s. Gideon King said to them, here's what I want to do. I want to give you $1,000 right now, today, and you will not charge a leaseholder fee on that property for 999 years. Imagine, if you had no idea before I started talking about this guy that he was nervy, now you know. And so what did the city fathers say? Yes, that's right. They said yes. And so, South Burlington split off from Burlington, and that little place that was verging on the edge there was annexed off with it. And now there are 2 or 3 houses on a street called White Place in South Burlington, where these days they only pay taxes on their domicile and not on their property because of Gideon King. Wow. Now I'm verging on South Burlington too, but in the wrong place. Hate that. But he was something else. This was a guy who, he was out on Lake Champlain, and one of his ships, we had a trade embargo going on, but Gideon King didn't care. Jabez Pennyman, a local doctor who'd been made a customs agent because everybody liked Pennyman, boarded Gideon King's ship with a couple of his men, and he was there on the boat. He finds the captain, And he walks up to Gideon King, and he says, Gideon King, we know exactly what you're up to with this smuggling business, and if you do not quit it, it will go bad for you. And apparently, Gideon King drew himself up to his full height, looked the customs agent in the eye and said, ask me, do I care? I allow no man to tell me how to run my business. Why should the President of the United States be any different? Right? So there are so many folks in the city of Burlington that I never heard about when I was in school. Gideon King, Isaac Nye, the hermit of Champlain, who I believe still hangs out in his building, the shanty on the shore, the lakefront in Burlington. One of the oldest buildings there in Burlington. A building that in the 1990s there was a fire, and that building had such strong and thick timbers that it was one of the things that saved the place. That and the sprinkler system. I mean, the firefighters who went to this fire said, it's amazing that this place was built in the late 1700s, the bones of it. I mean, look at this. This is unbelievable how strong the building is. So Isaac Nye, the hermit of Champlain, who was a peculiar man who really had no hobbies except that he liked to follow funerals. It said that it didn't matter whether Isaac Nye knew the deceased or not. In fact, most times he didn't. But that didn't stop him from calling young James Fogarty, an orphan he'd taken in, to bring his wagon around, hitch up his horse, and then he would get in the wagon in his Sunday best, go to the cemetery, watch until the last clod of dirt was thrown on the coffin, and then turn his horse around and come back into Burlington, go into his quarters. Nice Irish family lived upstairs. The woman who was the head of the household there, the mother, she made his evening meal, and Isaac Nye kept himself mostly. Then he had a business dealing with a man named Timothy Follett who wanted to bring the railroad from Rutland to Burlington, and that didn't go so well for him. They wanted to pay him $1,500 for the water rights behind his general store, and he said no. He just kept saying he wasn't going to take the money. And finally, he said that business had become distasteful to him when that money was put in the bank that was right across the street from his business without his permission, and the land was taken by the Supreme Court, eminent domain. So Isaac Nye locked himself up in his house, closed his store, never opened it again for 15 years, and then he passed away. And when he did, it was discovered when they read his last will and testament that he wanted to be laid on the counter where he'd done business before he passed away. So the store, imagine, the store's closed for 15 years, and they open it up, and they put his corpse on the counter. They don't clean anything. It's all cobwebs and rats, some dead, some alive, and dirt and mold. All of his products had molded on the shelves. And there's this guy right in the middle of everything. These people come from the city of Burlington to what was our first commercial district, and they just file through, and so my goodness, Isaac Nye. So I mentioned Timothy Follett, who was responsible for taking his water rights. He's another character you just don't hear about. Nobody in school that I know of knows that this man was this type A personality who developed a canal boat that pretty much revolutionized lake trade in his day. It was all modular, and the mast could flip down so they could go underneath bridges. Wonderful, smart guy who started his academic career at UVM at 14 and graduated at 17, was a lawyer by the time he was 21, was a lawyer, store owner, a guy who was some other investors owned a textile mill in the city of Winooski. But his big dream, they said, we'd love you on the Supreme Court. He said, no, bigger fish to fry, sorry. And he becomes the president of the Rutland and Burlington Railroad. And that works for him for a while. But that old expression, all good things must come to an end, and they did for Timothy Follett, whether it was karma because of the business deals he made that took from other people like Isaac Nye, I don't know. But Timothy Follett ended up losing his presidency with the Rutland and Burlington and dying penniless and alone in a local sanitarium. He lost his wealth and his health and his mind, but still, I admire him so much for all of the things he brought to the city of Burlington. His beautiful white mansion still sits on the hill on College Street, overlooking the lake. And I love to imagine the parties they used to have there. His wife Lorraine was a bit of a party girl, would have a party every week if he would allow it, and he loved her. He let her have as many parties as his pocketbook would allow. One Sunday, my husband Roger and I were sitting at the breakfast table. We were drinking our coffee and talking about our week, and I said, oh, I forgot to tell you this new thing I just learned the other day about Timothy Follett. I know I talk about Timothy Follett so much, and Roger's always so patient. But this time, he put his coffee mug down, and he looked into my eyes, and he said, Thea, if I didn't know you better, I'd think you had a little crush on Timothy Follett. And I said, Roger, if the only guy other than you I've got a crush on died in the mid-1800s, I think we're doing okay. So where are we for time? I want to let folks ask questions. So is there anybody who's got a question about anything I've talked about or anything you've heard about me or the tours or Burlington? Don't be shy. I don't bite. Here we go.
The murdered young woman, Barry, whatever happened to that? Did they just figure, was that a serial killer or was that just a single?
Actually, I didn't tip you off because it is in the book, and I didn't want to, I wanted to let you have an opportunity if you wanted to get the book to the rest of the story. But long story short, the local authorities were having some problems figuring it out. And so they got this guy, the reason it's called True Detective Stories is they got this man who was a pretty well-known detective down in the Boston area. And he came up, and he started doing things that I think would be a little bit more, we talk about forensics these days and how people do all the calculations and figure things out. And he was a little bit more like that. And so he put two and two together and figured out if Lucina Broadwell was going to Belle Parker's house, and she was acquainted with Belle Parker, she wasn't just going there for tea. And once he isolated that and started talking to witnesses, including some people that Lucina had been writing to outside the state, a friend of hers who had said, oh yeah, she's told me stories about the things she's doing when she's really told her husband that she's going out to see the picture show. And so they were able to figure out who the murderer was. Yeah. So it's a fascinating story, and it's just so I just feel so rewarded looking through our history and seeing sort of how people in different places handled things like that, what they did. And one of the things that was super interesting was, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to find the exact number, but if I go back to True Detective Stories and I look, my publisher, when I'm writing a book, they do, I write the book, and then I edit the book, and I have my husband look at it, and he's a great editor, and he edits the book. And then we send it along. We try to make sure that there are no extra vowels or consonants or entire words. And then they ask questions, and they'll say, this looks fine the way you wrote this, why did you write this way? Oh, we think the grammar's weird here, why did you do this? But one of the things they got back to me about was the population of Barrie at the time. And so the population of Barrie at the time, I'm trying to find exactly, you'd think that I'd have it right in the top of my head, but it was a whole lot of people, like comparable with a Vermont city these days. And so my managing editor gets back to me and says, what are you talking about, 20,000 people or whatever it was, or 30,000 people? That can't be right. And I said, well, normally, I would say, yeah, that might not be right, but what you have to understand is what Barrie was like at the time. And at that time, Barrie was this thriving granite town, and we're talking about Barrie proper, and then the outskirts of Barrie, and yeah, there were thousands and thousands of people there. It was a bustling city. If you looked at downtown Barrie in those days, if you look at it these days, you can see some of those old buildings from the early 1900s and the way, the grid of the city and how it was laid out. And it's been that way for a decently long time. I think, oh my gosh, there were certain pockets in Vermont that even though we think of Vermont, and my publisher thinks of Vermont as being very rural, it's hard to convince people in Charleston, South Carolina, that we, have, we don't have cows running down the main thoroughfares or something like that. But yeah, there were quite a few people, and so that's one of the things that happens when I'm writing a book. The next book that I'm going to be writing is a book about Burlington's wonderful Lawn Park Cemetery, Lakeview Cemetery, which is on North Avenue in Burlington, right between Burlington High School and the old St. Joseph's Orphanage, which is having its own trials and tribulations these days, and has been for many years. What's that? Oh, I heard somebody mention. Anyway, the orphanage is so interesting to me. There was a Chamber of Commerce event, some type of monthly gala that my husband and I went to several years back when Burlington College had taken over St. Joseph's Orphanage. And I walked into the vestibule to do a tour of the old building, and there was a lady who was maybe in her mid-30s, standing about 6 or 7 feet away, and she looked at me and she said, "You're the lady who does the ghost tours." And I was trying to be a little under the radar myself, and I said, "Yes." And she said, "Is this place haunted?" And I said, "Yes." Because from the minute I walked in the vestibule, I had this kind of hair standing up on the back of my neck, and I get this really strange feeling when I'm in the presence of a lot of paranormal energy that I call the jitter. And it starts in my chest, and it's just this, almost like an anxiety attack. And so this lovely lady, about my age, was standing opposite me, and she said, "Oh, well, I'm sure if there are any ghosts in this place, they're all happy and at peace because the nuns and the priests and all that support." And I just put my head down, and my husband just looked at me and said, "Shh." So we walked through that place, and I have to say, recently there have been reports in the local newspapers of the victims there, people who live there, talking about other victims. And one thing that I don't know where, I hope I'm not overstepping, don't know where anyone stands on this. I was raised Catholic. I have a respect for religion and spirituality. But when one of the victims said that she saw someone push out a window, it really gave me the willies, because during that tour, my husband and I had walked through the dormitories, past a sanctuary for the nuns, and to a place that I can only say these days looked like a three-season porch kind of thing in the back of the orphanage. And when I was standing back there, I had such an awful feeling, and I just looked at the article and said to my husband, "Gosh, I hope that wasn't the window." I mean, I think that there's going to be, of course, you've seen anything in the news, WCAX or your own local paper, there are going to be further investigations, and I have no doubt that they'll be looking at that property very carefully as the rest of the development goes on behind the Cambria Rise building that's already there. And I certainly hope that those folks that are in those apartments in the orphanage these days are having an easy time of it. It's my understanding that before the apartments were constructed, there was a Native American lady who was brought through to sage all of the four corners of that old orphanage, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing. So hopefully we won't hear about anything unsettled going on there for them. Yes?
Smuggler's Harbor over on Valcourt has a memorial of a group of people that sounded to me like they were involved in this country.
I'm going to have you, I'm going to come, well, I don't know how far I can come. Here we go. As long as I'm not near the speaker, I should be okay. What was it you said?
So Smuggler's Harbor, Valcourt Island, there's a memorial there. Are you aware of that? What it's about?
It's, okay. I get my islands confused. There's Southport Island, and then there's the other one with all the poison ivy that is, heck, it's escaping me, I think. There was an island where there were a lot of...
It's where the Revolutionary War...
Right, and is Valcourt Island the one where all the soldiers washed up on shore? I'm getting my history mixed, but anyway, so I'm going to have to go back into my files and look, because I know that there's a monument on one and a memorial on the other, I believe. Yeah. Okay, Crab Island. Crab Island, which there was a family living on Crab Island for a long time, back in the late 1800s or early 1900s, but apparently it's so infested with poison ivy that it's uninhabitable. Yeah.
That was the word.
Okay, yes. Okay. All right.
It's like first ship or something.
There's got to be a lot of homicide on there, I would think. I mean, I love, the fact that we're this wonderful lake dotted with all of these great islands. I love, well, in Burlington, there's a little tiny island that looks like a shark's fin, but it's really, it's like a little outcropping of rock, and you probably know it if you've traveled past there. Dunder, you all know the story of Dunder? Rock Dunder, for those of you who don't. So back in the days of the Abenaki, there was supposed to be this god-like creature named Ozihuzu. And Ozihuzu had no legs, but had these huge, powerful forearms. And the story was that he dragged himself all around the unformed land that later became, the Champlain and other valleys and Lake Champlain. And then it rained, and it rained. And he saw Lake Champlain filled up with rain, and then the sun came out, and the sparkles on the water were magnificent. The view was incredible, and Ozihuzu decided that he would turn himself to stone and just remain there in Burlington's harbor so he could watch this spectacle that he created for all eternity. The more modern story from the 1800s is that there was a Commodore on a ship during the War of 1812, and it was dark, 3 in the morning maybe, and he sees this thing rising up out of Lake Champlain in the mists, and he says to his men, "Fire, fire!" And they say, no, we're sorry, Captain. It's not a British craft, it's this big rock. And he says, ridiculous, fire, fire. So they spend a couple of hours lobbing ammunition at this thing. And then the sun rises and the mists part, and he sees that they were right, and he's so annoyed that he utters the thing that's sort of closest to a swear word back then, I guess. It's a rock, by thunder! So now it's Rock Dunder. And anybody visited Vermont Common Brewery in Burlington? They used to have an ale called Rock Dunder Ale. Fantastic. But my favorite ale there, they don't have anymore. My husband and I went in one night, and I love bangers and mash. Anything covered with gravy, yes, thank you, please and thank you. So sausages and mashed potatoes and gravy, and these buttered carrots with cinnamon. And I said, what am I going to, looking at the menu, what kind of beer is this? There's a Bavarian ale called Beetlejuice. So I ordered one, and it was delicious. So I ordered another one, and when the server came over to take my order, he leaned over and said, "Hon, I can let you order 2, but if you order 3, Michael Keaton comes to your table to bother you." So they don't make it anymore, sadly. The Vermont Common Brewery is another place that's so wonderfully haunted. Mike Trepanier, the chef there when I was writing the Ghosts and Legends of Lake Champlain, told me that they had a ghost in the kitchen who was always stealing ingredients and throwing things at people. He said one morning he went in, he remembers that he was preparing for a big event in town. He believed that it was the Mardi Gras parade, and they'd done a bunch of prep the day before, but he said, you can never have enough. He believes what I believe. You can just never have enough mashed potatoes. So he was peeling potatoes when he thought, Mike, you're going to need that big stainless steel kettle on the high shelf. He didn't get to finish his thought, because that's when the stainless steel kettle came flying across the room and hit the sink next to him hard enough to leave a mark. He told me, he hollered out, "Randy, I don't need your crap this morning." I said, hold on, Mike T. The ghost in the kitchen at the Vermont Common Brewery is called Randy? And he said, well, maybe not. But here's why we call him Randy. He said, a lot of us have been a party to the ghostly energy. We have been mistaken, but we just sat down and we're all by ourselves and we look and they're not there. Or we had ingredients or pans thrown across the kitchen, but none of us had ever seen a ghost. Until finally, look at this guy who comes to work in a Vermont Public Brewery cleaning. So he comes in early in the morning, he cleans up from the night before, and he's usually leaving when we get there. So we go in one morning, me and a couple of other guys, and he's freaked out, sitting at a table. He's got his elbow on the table, and he's shaking his head, and he just looks awful. And so we said, "What's the matter?" He says, "Well, I saw the ghost." So they all gathered around and said, "Oh, dude, you are kidding. Come on, if you saw the ghost, you've got to tell us what he looks like." So the guy stood up and put his hand on his hip, and he goes, "Well, it's kind of hard to describe." "No, hold on. You know what? He looks a good bit like my brother Randy, who none of them had ever met." So this ghost, Ira or Ethan or Jebediah, will be Randy now for all eternity. Anyone? Oh, it looks like we're getting close. Any more questions? Yeah, I'll go there and then there. Yes.
Is the University of Vermont with it?
Oh, the University of Vermont. So many, so awesome. 14 presumed haunts. Everything from poltergeist activity to full-body apparitions at the University of Vermont. There's a wonderful ghost at a house called Bittersweet that was built by a man named Thaddeus Tuttle for his son back in the early 1800s. It was owned by his son for a while, and several people, private home, and then this woman, Daisy Smith, in the 1930s, buys this place. She lives in it for quite some time, and then in the early 1960s, late 50s, early 60s, the University of Vermont comes to her because there it is, verging on the green, and they say, "Mrs. Smith, we would love to buy your home. We want to turn it into a dormitory for our young female students." And she says, "Well, you may buy my home as long as I can live in it until I pass on." And as far as anybody knows, she's more than picked up her side of the bargain. People see her in the corridors there in this building that it's all cut up into offices now. I went into the building to do a ghost investigation with my friends, the Vermont Spirits Detective Agency. If you came to see me last time, I think I talked about them then, they called themselves the private eye for those who die. So we went into Daisy Smith's home at the Bittersweet, and we were asking all kinds of questions of anyone we could think of who had lived there, and didn't hear any responses while we were in the place. We heard some weird things. We heard footsteps in a closet. We couldn't figure out what was going on there. So a couple of weeks later, Matt Gordon, the head of the team, calls me. And he says, "Are you near your computer?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm writing a book, so I'm right here." He said, "Look in your email, I'm sending you an EVP," so an electronic voice projection file. I open up his mail, and I click on the file, and I hear Gloria, another investigator, asking questions of Daisy Smith while we were upstairs next to her old bedroom. And she's talking about Daisy Smith's life, and then she says, "Well, what about your house? Do you like what they've done to it?" And you hear this kind of weird, staticky noise that then sounds like the bubbles from the tanks on the old Jacques Cousteau show from when I was a kid, with all this little fizzy noise. And then you hear a voice say slowly, a little distorted, "Well, it's not very comfortable." It's true. It's not very comfortable. It's filled with desks and rolling chairs. But one funny thing that happened during that investigation was whenever I investigate a place with Vermont spirits, I always bring a little gift for the ghost I know has been there in life. And I brought a tiny little bone china teacup and saucer for Daisy Smith and put it on the original mantle in the room where the administrative assistant sits. And I understand from talking to the folks in the building later that she almost lost her mind when she came in and found this little bone china cup and saucer from another era sitting up there on the mantle after she probably thought was haunted Daisy Smith and who had decided she was a bit thirsty.
Yes, if you want another wicked Vermonter, there was a lady in East Richford, Vermont, nicknamed Queen Lil, but I think her name was Lillian Minor. Is she in the book?
Yes, she is, thank you.
It's a wonderful story.
She's fabulous.
Did you know about her court trial?
Well, I I
when
don't
she was
know,
taken to court.
I don't go too much into the court trial, but I
Anyway,
love,
she was convicted, she owned a bordello, and it was right on the border, half the house in the States, half the house in Canada. And when they raid, the clients would run one way or the other, depending. Once in a while, they'd run both ways.
Yes.
And she was taken to court, and she was fined for keeping $120, I believe it was, for keeping a disorderly house.
yes, that's what they called it back in those days, a disorderly house. Yeah, yeah. Like I
But
said,
she did marry a farmer named, I think his name was Miner,
she
and
did.
became a very respectable lady. She was very, very wealthy. They owned like 5 farms around that area.
I mean, she was, I blame it all on Boston. Because she lived in Vermont for a while. She went to Boston and she saw how it was done and came back to Vermont and said, this is so easy. Thank goodness I went to Salem, Massachusetts on a ghost tour and I wasn't around in the 1800s to go visit Massachusetts and come back and come up with anything else. 'Cause I don't want to add to the family reputation.
Did you ever look into Susie Wilson?
I have not looked into Susie Wilson, but I have some family that used to live out that way, and I'm hoping that my research and the new books will take me more out in the Williston, Essex area. There is a story in here about Sally Bristol, the old, I don't know if you're aware, the old murder mystery back in the 1800s, Williston.
One that usually you hear ghost stories that are associated with buildings.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, that's Susie Wilson's house in the building. And a 16-year-old girl who worked for Susie Wilson in the train was murdered in this house.
Oh.
So I always wondered if there was any ghosts in that girl.
You're going to send me running back to all of my old newspapers this afternoon. That's what happens. Unfortunately, I won't be able to join you for lunch. I had such a great time last time. I've got some appointments at home, but I'm going to do those appointments, and then there are other things I should be doing, but now I'm going to be madly Googling Susie Wilson.
Susie Wilson, there was an article in the Free Press on the opinion page one day asking the question of who she was. And someone from the Historical Society or something or other wrote back and said she was a kindly elderly woman who took in soldiers from the fort when they were homesick.
Oh, nice.
And I, in the late 40s, I've been there
Yeah.
a number of times with my mother.
Wow.
And the entrance had a big parlor, and kind of like couches around. And every once in a while, somebody would knock on the door, and there'd be a young man, and he would come to the door, and she would call out, "Oh, Lorraine, your date is here."
Oh, my goodness.
And so the rain would come out and they would walk the stairs like this. And so, until I was a bit older, I thought that we were on a date and went upstairs sometimes.
Oh, my God. Oh, my goodness.
Well, Susie Wilson, everybody knew what this was, and everyone respected her. And they went to her for advice, for loans, and for help with different things.
And then they named a road after her.
And then they
Oh, wow. I mean, it's funny how these things, I mean, in New Street, there's a street called Follett Street, after Timothy Follett, and people did tend to remember, I think, the things that people did that were noteworthy, that were good, and kind of shove under the rug the other things that they knew, were going on. And Timothy Follett, in his final days, or final years, didn't know what to do with himself, basically. He was developing a dementia, and he was messing up not just the Rutland and Burlington Railroad Company's business, but his own holdings and other people's holdings that he was managing. And you don't hear about that. You don't know about it unless you look at the old Burlington Free Press and find out things like what I found out, that this $1,500 is supposed to be held in the Merchants Bank. Timothy Follett had been the Merchants Bank's president before he was president of the Rutland and Burlington. And so the money that said, okay, Isaac and I won't take this cash. Timothy Follett said, great, you won't take it? I'll put it in the bank. And so decades after Isaac and I passed away, his final heir is saying, this is ridiculous. I mean, the Supreme Court's convened a board, and, we're still fighting about the water rights, railroad's already gone through, just give me the money. Wherever the money is, just give me the money. And they look, and the money's not there. It was never there. So, so Timothy Follett probably thought, put the money in there someday. He doesn't want it. It's not going to do any good. He's all hidden away in his house. Yeah, crazy.